Imagine a scene straight out of television history where the dusty hills of Simi Valley transformed into the perfect idyllic backdrop of the American frontier. The golden California sun drenched the wooden planks of the Ingalls homestead, while the cast and crew shared breathless laughter between the director's calls to cut. And there was Melissa Sue Anderson slipping into character with that signature icy discipline that set her apart from every other child star of her generation. However, beneath that polished professional exterior, a storm was quietly brewing, a private dissatisfaction she kept locked away behind a carefully constructed wall of silence. To the adoration of millions, she would forever be Mary Ingalls, the angelic daughter, who navigated tragedy with saint-like patience and grace. Yet the cameras missed the real drama unfolding just out of frame, a simmering tension that would eventually threaten to crack the wholesome image of the show. It was the kind of friction that doesn't explode in a tabloid headline immediately, but accumulates like heavy dust in the corners of a room unnoticed until it chokes the air. One fateful afternoon, long before the public caught wind of any backstage feuds, a subtle realization shifted her entire worldview, planting a seed of rebellion that would grow into a shocking departure. In the decades that followed, fans were left whispering about the real reasons obsessing over the burning question that Melissa rarely addressed directly. Why would a young actress at the peak of her fame walk away from the guaranteed paycheck and stardom of America's favourite family drama, years before she became the stoic, tragic heart of Little House on the Prairie? Melissa was just a shy girl, realising she possessed a magnetic quality that demanded attention. Born in Berkeley, California in 1962, she wasn't your typical loud, precocious Hollywood hopeful clamouring for the spotlight. She was an observer, a child who possessed an unnerving ability to analyse a room before uttering a single word, displaying a maturity that often unsettled adults. Her parents quickly recognised that this wasn't just shyness. It was a fierce, internal discipline rarely seen in grade schoolers. She tackled every task with a level of seriousness that bordered on intensity, a trait that would later fuel rumours of her being difficult or aloof on set. When her family relocated to the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles, the entertainment industry was hungry for fresh faces, but no one predicted how rapidly Melissa would ascend the Hollywood ladder. By her early teenage years, she had already built an impressive resume of national commercials and guest appearances, navigating the cutthroat audition circuit with ease. Every gig showcased a performer with raw, instinctive emotional intelligence, proving she wasn't just a cute kid reciting lines, she was an actress. Casting directors whispered about her poise, noting that while other kids were running wild, Melissa sat still absorbed, understanding the business better than most adults. So when the casting call went out for Little House on the Prairie in the early 1970s, her name was already circling the top of the list for the eldest Ingalls daughter. The moment she walked into that audition room, the energy changed. It wasn't just an audition, it was a coronation. Insiders later revealed that she possessed a haunting vulnerability, a broken bird quality that felt uncomfortably real and utterly captivating. Michael Landon, the powerhouse behind the show, saw instantly that her cool reserve was the perfect foil to the fiery, untamed energy of Melissa Gilbert, who was cast as Laura. This contrast, the ice against the fire, didn't just create on-screen chemistry. It sparked a real-life rivalry and distance that would fuel on-set gossip for years to come. Cameras started rolling in 1974, and from day one, Melissa treated the dusty hot set like a serious workplace, not a playground. While other child actors complained about the heat or played pranks, she treated every script like Shakespeare, carrying a heavy sense of duty. It was as if she felt the ghost of the real Mary Ingalls watching her, demanding perfection in portraying the hardships of 19th century pioneer life. Initially, the scripts for Mary were safe and sweet, focused on schoolyard crushes and family bonding, the epitome of innocent television. But the writers quickly realised they had a powerhouse on their hands. Beneath her stillness lay a deep well of sorrow that was cinematic gold. Crew members from that era recall her isolating herself before emotional takes, whispering lines into the void, shutting out the chaos until she was completely alone in her head. She was never the class clown, never the one leading the games between takes. Instead, she was the consummate professional, steady and reliable, but perhaps a little too grown up for a cast full of children, further widening the gap between her and her co-stars. Michael Landon put his full faith in her acting chops, leading to a storyline twist that would define the series and seal Melissa's fate in television history. Starting in 1976, the show launched the devastating arc that would strip Mary Ingalls of her sight, transforming the character forever. She went from being just the pretty older sister to the show's tragic emotional anchor, navigating a terrifying descent into blindness that gripped the entire nation. It was a brutal workload for a teenager, emotionally taxing and technically difficult, yet Melissa attacked the challenge with that same trademark intensity. She visited schools for the blind, studied the mechanics of sightlessness, and refused to break character, obsessed with authenticity. She was determined to nail the performance, and the result was nothing short of a television phenomenon. Millions of Americans wept as they watched Mary stumble through darkness, and Melissa's portrayal was so raw and grounded that it blurred the lines between acting and reality. This wasn't a melodramatic soap opera performance. It was a quiet, dignified, and heartbreaking portrayal of loss that silenced her critics. The industry took notice, rewarding her with a prestigious Primetime Emmy Award nomination in 1978, cementing her status as a serious dramatic talent. As the seasons ground on, the writers piled more tragedy onto her character miscarriages, fires, mental breakdowns, turning Mary into the show's perpetual victim. However, as the accolades grew, so did the stifling feeling of being trapped in a role that allowed for nothing but suffering and sainthood. Behind the wholesome prairie sunsets and the warm, glowing hearth of the family cabin, the walls were closing in on Melissa. The reality of being Hollywood's favourite tragic heroine began to feel like a cage, and unknown to the fans, she was already plotting her escape from the prairie. As the massive television phenomenon that was Little House on the Prairie pushed deeper into its legendary run, the dynamics on set began to shift significantly. Melissa Sue Anderson was no longer just a child star. Her commanding presence had evolved into one of the series' most critical emotional anchors, grounding the show in reality. The sweet, introspective girl who had first walked onto the set back in 1974 was now shouldering some of the most intense and heavy dramatic material ever broadcast on American network television. Her devastating portrayal of Mary Ingalls, particularly as the character faced the tragic and permanent loss of her eyesight, had already garnered massive critical acclaim and viewer sympathy across the nation. However, the years that followed brought an avalanche of even more complicated storylines, creating moments that demanded a level of psychological endurance that was incredibly rare for such a young performer to possess. By the time 1979 rolled around, Melissa had dragged the character of Mary through tragedy after tragedy, with every single tear-jerking arc crafted specifically because the writers knew only she could pull it off. Millions of viewers tuned in weekly to watch Mary navigate the darkness, struggling to adapt to a world she could no longer see, while fighting to carve out an independent life. Her journey eventually led to a sweeping romance when she fell deeply in love with her teacher, Adam Kendall, providing a glimmer of hope amidst the sorrow. The wedding episode, which hit the airwaves in the late 1970s, became an instant classic and remains one of the most cherished and highest-rated storylines in the entire history of the franchise. For Melissa, this wasn't just another script. It was another chance to deliver a quiet, powerful performance rooted in absolute dignity and emotional truth, silencing any doubters. Her reputation on set was ironclad. She arrived fully prepared, remained laser-focused, and respected the gravity of every single scene she was in. In return for that professionalism, the writers piled more onto her plate, turning Mary into a national symbol of resilience, a character who met shattering heartbreak with a quiet strength that didn't need to scream to be heard. But let's be real, with these heavy stories came an undeniable intensity that weighed on the young star. Mary Ingalls was absolutely no longer the gentle, studious girl from Walnut Grove we met in the pilot. She had transformed into a young woman forced to endure some of the heaviest, most depressing burdens seen in any family drama of that television era. For Melissa Sue Anderson, maintaining this level of performance required a relentless, constant emotional availability week after agonising week. Every single script seemed to ask her to dig deeper into the well of sadness, and each new storyline demanded more of her soul, all while the overall tone of the series was beginning to morph. Little House on the Prairie started to expand its scope, moving far beyond its early simplicity and adding sharp dramatic turns to keep the ratings high. These shifts pushed the beloved characters into increasingly complex and often darker narratives that mirrored the changing landscape of American TV. Michael Landon, the powerhouse who served as producer, head writer and lead actor, continued shaping these difficult stories, testing his cast in ways they never expected. As Mary's on-screen world grew darker and infinitely more challenging, Melissa found herself carrying a massive chunk of the show's emotional gravity squarely on her shoulders. In 1980, her performance in the standout episode The Blind Journey grabbed the industry's attention, showcasing her uncanny ability to project both steel-spine strength and fragile vulnerability without ever chewing the scenery. Critics couldn't stop praising her discipline and her ability to handle adult themes with such grace. They specifically highlighted the emotional clarity she brought to a role that could have easily become a caricature in lesser hands. That same year, the series hit a major turning point when Mary and Adam opened their school for the blind, a storyline that gave Melissa fresh, complex layers to explore, emphasising compassion, heavy responsibility and grit. Through all the on-screen trauma and long hours, Melissa remained the consummate professional, never letting the drama bleed into her work ethic. Crew members from that era vividly remembered her as focused, incredibly polite, and obsessively dedicated to portraying Mary with total integrity. The on-screen relationship between Mary and Adam blossomed into one of the show's most heartfelt threads, grounded in a partnership of mutual respect that fans adored. Her co-star Linwood Boomer later confessed that working opposite Melissa forced him to bring his absolute best to every take because she never gave anything less than 100%. But as the series evolved and drifted into the early 1980s, the creative direction began to undergo a distinct change. Suddenly, new characters were popping up, the show was experimenting with different tones, and for the first time, Mary's pivotal role started to drift towards the background. It wasn't an overnight shock or a sudden firing. It was a slow burn, but the reduction in her screen time was impossible to ignore. The storylines began to centre elsewhere, and the character who had once carried the show's most powerful emotional arcs was appearing less and less frequently. The young actress who had sacrificed years of her own childhood and adolescence to build this series now found herself standing at a very quiet, uncertain crossroads. She had literally grown up on that soundstage, constructing her early identity through the public lens of playing Mary Ingalls. She had poured her heart into every demanding scene, never complaining about the heavy workload or the tears she had to shed. Yet the television landscape around her was shifting and her path was diverging. A major decision was looming, one that would forever mark the next chapter of her life and career. By the early 1980s, Little House on the Prairie was simply no longer the pioneering, intimate family drama it had been when it premiered. It had mutated into something larger, more ambitious, and in many ways much more crowded, with fresh faces fighting for screen time. A flood of new children, new adopted families, and fresh arcs filled the once simple tapestry of Walnut Grove, cluttering the narrative. As these fresh narratives took centre stage to appeal to a new demographic, Mary Ingalls, the heavy hitter of the show's emotional core, found herself quietly stepping back into the shadows. Melissa Sue Anderson didn't feel this shift through screaming matches or dramatic confrontations in the producer's office. She felt it through the cold, simple reality of the scripts arriving at her door. Weeks would pass where she had significantly fewer scenes to film. Storylines that would have once revolved around her struggles were now pivoting toward the younger, newer cast members. Mary's presence became gentler and more occasional acting, almost like a nostalgic echo of the early seasons, rather than a driving force of the plot. It was the brutal, natural evolution of a long-running Hollywood show, yet for Melissa it marked a deeply meaningful and inevitable change. She dedicated 8 prime years of her youth to inhabiting the soul of Mary Ingalls. That is, 8 years of mastering emotional subtleties, maintaining strict professional discipline, and showing an unwavering commitment to the craft. Throughout that entire run, she handled every single scene with delicate care, never phoning it in for a second. Always staying true to the historical legacy of the real Mary Ingalls while keeping her portrayal deeply grounded in raw, honest sincerity. However, as the spotlight began to drift across the ever-expanding ensemble cast, she realised her role was losing the gravitas and purpose that had once defined it. During this transitional era, Michael Landon was relentlessly shaping the show with his trademark intensity writing and directing the bulk of the episodes, while trying to juggle the logistics of a cast that was bursting at the seams. To keep the show fresh, the expansion was aggressive, requiring the introduction of entirely new families to the canvas, including the adopted Ingalls children and various townspeople whose fresh narratives offered new angles for the viewing audience to latch onto. It was a calculated creative strategy designed to keep the series breathing and evolving, but it was a move that inevitably shrank the territory available for the original stars to operate in. For Melissa, this shift in the status quo brought a moment of quiet, undeniable clarity about her future. She had grown up on that set, maturing not just as a skilled actress, but as a young woman navigating her formative years in the public eye. She had shouldered the burden of the show's most gut-wrenching storylines, earned high-level critical praise, and proved she had the chops to carry complex dramatic narratives. But she possessed the wisdom to understand that for a character to matter, their journey needs to have a destination and real substance. Without those crucial ingredients, showing up to work no longer matched the high artistic standards she demanded of herself. So in 1981, after years of pouring her heart into the role, Melissa Sue Anderson made the heavy decision to decline returning as a series regular. It wasn't a choice born from a backstage feud or petty disappointment, but simply from facing the cold, hard truth. Her character's narrative arc had hit a definitive ceiling, and she realised that bowing out gracefully was the only honest move left on the board. Her exit signalled the closing of a major chapter for millions of loyal viewers who had grown up alongside her. For seasons, fans had formed a deep emotional bond with Mary's quiet resilience, her gentle power, and that understated courage she displayed in every episode. They had watched her survive devastating heartbreak, physical loss, romance, and victory, all anchored by Melissa's incredibly steady and mature performance. Although Mary would pop up occasionally in later seasons as a guest, the true heartbeat of her story had effectively stopped beating. In the press interviews that followed her departure, Melissa spoke with total class about her tenure on the series, expressing genuine gratitude for the gig that launched her career. She openly acknowledged the creative pivot the show had taken and the undeniable reality that her character had outgrown the limited box the writers now had for her. You could not find a trace of bitterness in her words, only a serene acceptance that the show had to evolve, and so did she. That bold decision unlocked the gates to brand new chapters in her personal and professional life, allowing her the freedom to explore diverse roles, chase down gritty dramatic challenges, and step into a much larger world beyond the dirt roads of Walnut Grove. Yet for the millions watching at home, the version of Mary Ingalls she created remained iconic, permanently etched in pop culture history as a symbol of warmth and profound emotional depth. Before long, the public would come to understand the actual motivation behind her exit, a reason rooted not in tabloid drama, but in the profound integrity of an artist who chose self-respect over a paycheck and purpose over routine. By the time Melissa Sue Anderson entered her late teens, she had already logged more hours on camera than most actors do in a lifetime. From the moment she debuted as Mary Ingalls in 1974, she was tasked with carrying the heaviest emotional baggage the show had to offer. Going blind, suffering heartbreak, navigating marriage, dealing with tragic loss. These were heavy, exhausting storylines for any performer, let alone a child growing into adulthood while the whole country watched. As the series pushed into the late 1970s and early 1980s, Melissa felt an internal shift that she couldn't ignore. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, it wasn't an impulsive snap, it was just the truth. Mary Ingalls, once a central pillar of the community, was being squeezed out. Melissa was the type of actress who needed friction and challenge to thrive. She craved arcs that forced her to stretch her abilities to evolve and to mine the emotional landscape with the same ferocity she applied to Mary's blindness saga. That was, after all, a performance so powerful it earned her a frantic Emmy nomination. But as the writers embraced new family dynamics and brought in younger children to reset the clock, Mary's journey naturally faded into the background noise. Her screen time became scarce. Her storylines thinned out. For a talent like Melissa, this presented a major career crossroads. She genuinely loved her castmates. She held deep respect for Michael Landon. She appreciated the financial security the show provided. But she was smart enough to know that staying in a job just because it feels safe is the exact opposite of artistic growth. Especially not when she had already emptied the tank, giving everything she had to Mary's story. In her memoir, Melissa broke down the situation with the same poise she brought to the screen. She admitted that her character simply had nowhere left to go. Without meaningful plot development to sink her teeth into, she could not continue to challenge herself as a serious actress. And if she couldn't bring her absolute best to the set, she refused to stay because the work mattered too much to her integrity. There were no screaming matches behind the scenes. There was no dramatic walkout, no bad blood, just the simple, quiet honesty of an artist realising her time on that specific stage was officially done. It was the inevitable finale to a golden era. For a starlet who had captured the nation's adoration from the very first pilot episode, walking away was a move filled with both heavy significance and undeniable elegance. Exiting the series meant severing daily ties with the surrogate family she had cultivated amidst the lights and cameras of the studio lot. Melissa Gilbert, the actress behind her on-screen sister Laura, has frequently opened up about the genuine connection they shared during those formative years on set. She often described Melissa Sue Anderson as a powerhouse of discipline, laser-focused and possessing a dedication to the art of acting that went far beyond her tender age. The show's creator, Michael Landon, trusted her explicitly with the script's most grueling emotional storylines, confident she would deliver a performance grounded in raw truth. Catherine McGregor. Karen Grassel and the entire ensemble cast had constructed an entire universe alongside her. A world forged in the fires of 14-hour shoot days, communal catering, on-set giggles, and the unglamorous grind of working side by side for ages. Turning your back on that level of security took real guts. Back in 1981, when the news broke that Melissa was finished as a series regular, the fan base was absolutely floored. Mary Ingalls had evolved into a cultural icon, standing as a testament that dignity and toughness could survive even the harshest frontier realities. To the devoted viewers, her departure felt like the show had lost a vital organ, a massive piece of its soul. Yet Melissa understood she was charting a course that paid respect to her own needs as well as the legacy of her character. She dove into fresh roles and tackled completely different genres. She gave herself permission to expand her horizons, stepping out of the shadow of the little girl audiences had watched grow up on their television sets. Decades later, she was still vocal about her appreciation for Little House on the Prairie, citing it as the cornerstone experience of her professional life. However, she never shied away from reiterating the hard truth about her exit to anyone who asked. She packed her bags because the clock had run out, her character's journey had hit a creative dead end, and lingering without purpose would have been a betrayal to both her fans and her own artistic spirit. It wasn't about backstage drama, contract disputes, or rebellion against Walnut Grove. It was about sticking to her principles. It was an act of profound self-respect, demonstrating the quiet bravery required to pick personal evolution over the easy paycheck and comfort. Through that singular decision, Melissa Sue Anderson exposed the sophisticated woman living beneath the bonnet of one of television's most cherished figures. When Melissa Sue Anderson finally bowed out of Little House on the Prairie in 1981, she was leaving behind far more than just a soundstage or a script. She was walking away from the very environment that moulded her adolescence, honed her skills, and broadcast her face into millions of American living rooms for nearly 10 years. To the masses, she was frozen in time as Mary Ingalls, reliable, poised, and possessing a quiet, unshakable fortitude. But for Melissa herself, the subsequent years transformed into a quest to define her identity separate from the fictional pioneer girl who dominated her youth. Breaking free gave her the chance to reclaim a power she hadn't truly held since she was a little kid. The power of choice. For the first time in her working life, she called the shots on which narratives she wanted to explore and which personas she wanted to adopt. She finally held the steering wheel regarding the trajectory of her own existence. She ventured into heavy dramas, made-for-TV thrillers and cameo spots, intentionally selecting gigs that offered her the breathing room to stretch her acting muscles. She popped up in diverse projects like Which Mother Is Mine, the slasher cult classic, Happy Birthday to Me, and the gritty crime series The Equalizer. She was methodically sculpting a new reputation as a mature actress, calculated, picky, and immensely serious about her performance. Yet, as her resume expanded, her private world began to take on a richer, deeper meaning. In 1990, Melissa tied the knot with television producer Michael Sloan, kicking off a phase of life dictated not by Hollywood's demands, but by domestic bliss. The couple built a family with 2 children, and eventually she made the bold call to put being a mom ahead of the relentless grinding hustle of the entertainment industry. This wasn't giving up. It wasn't vanishing into the ether. It was a redefined version of power, prioritizing being present over being famous and living with intent rather than chasing headlines. By 2002, Melissa and her brood had officially become Canadian citizens. They embraced a low-key lifestyle that permitted her kids to blossom without the heavy baggage of their mother's stardom hanging over them. She kept her toe in the water, working on her own terms and contributing to the arts without letting the business consume her whole identity. Then in 2010, she dropped The Way I See It, a look back at my life on Little House. It was the tell-all memoir fans had been waiting for, finally giving her a platform to discuss her time on the legendary show. Her tone was candid, balanced, and classy. She didn't go for cheap shots or sensationalism. She detailed the struggle of portraying Mary, the exhausting schedules, and the emotional toll of the heavier plots. She opened up about the weirdness of being a kid expected to deliver adult-grade dramatic performances, while acknowledging her deep thanks. She gave credit where it was due, praising Michael Landon's mentorship and the massive doors the show opened for her. Crucially, she laid out exactly why she left. Her character had nowhere else to go, and she refused to stagnate in a gig that offered no room for growth. This transparency offered the audience something they had been craving for decades. Not trashy rumours, but genuine closure and understanding. It helped them view her exit with a fresh perspective, realising that walking away wasn't about abandoning the ship. It was about a young woman taking control of her destiny with class, self-knowledge and professional pride. These days, Melissa Sue Anderson's impact isn't measured by how many credits she racked up post-Little House, but by the sheer quality of the work she delivered and the grace with which she lived her life. To this day, she remains one of the most revered and dignified actresses to ever grace the screen during her era. She is endlessly celebrated for the raw emotional honesty she injected into the character of Mary Ingalls, as well as the intentional private life she cultivated far away from the flashing cameras. Her eventual exit from the series, which was once the subject of so much confusion and rumour, now stands as a shining example of the quiet bravery that has defined her entire professional journey. She gifted the world a performance that has stood the test of time for nearly 50 years, a legacy that new generations are constantly discovering, analysing and falling in love with all over again. Her nuanced portrayal of Mary continues to be recognised as one of television history's most heartbreaking and inspiring depictions of true resilience. Furthermore, her life after Little House on the Prairie is proof positive that a child star can honour their Hollywood roots while still boldly charting their own course. For Melissa Sue Anderson, walking away wasn't an ending at all. It was the vibrant beginning of becoming the woman she wanted to be entirely on her own terms. When you look at the big picture, Melissa Sue Anderson's narrative isn't about fading away, being rejected by the industry, or some unsolved mystery. It is, in fact, the empowering story of a young woman who possessed the courage to leave the table before the world could decide her menu for her. For nearly a decade of television history, She breathed life into Mary Ingalls with a sophisticated depth that was light years beyond her actual age. She carried heavy themes of heartache, survival and quiet strength in every single frame. And when that chapter finally ended, she opted for something much more substantial than fleeting fame. She chose herself. She constructed a life built on purpose, family values, and the rare audacity to remain still in a society that screams for constant hustle and motion. Her enduring legacy glows not just in the classic episodes that continue to bring comfort to viewers almost half a century later. It is found in the immense dignity with which she stepped into adulthood, measured, grounded, and refreshingly human in a superficial world. Melissa's journey serves as a powerful reminder to us all that sometimes the bravest move a person can make is to simply turn the page. Even when the entire world is begging them to stay in the same lane, her personal truth, once misunderstood by the masses, has won out. It now stands as a silent victory of self-awareness and grace. For more touching celebrity stories just like this one, be sure to check out the next video.